The Wars of the Diadochi now. The Diadochi, that's Greek for successors, don't you know, were in essence Alexander the Great's rather ambitious generals who, after his untimely demise, embarked on a rather messy internecine struggle for the division of his colossal empire. A real free-for-all it was. Amongst those who threw their hats into this particular ring were Perdiccas, whom Alexander had, rather foresightedly, appointed as regent for his future son, Alexander IV, who, as it happened, arrived a mere 2 months after his father's death. Then there was Antipater, the established ruler of Macedon and Greece, Eumenes, Alexander's rather clever secretary who handled all the diplomatic niceties, Ptolemy I Soter and Lysimachus, both of whom had been Alexander's personal bodyguards, tough chaps, Seleucus I Nicator, commander of the royal pages, a unit comprised of rather noble Macedonian youth, and of course Antipater's son-in-law, Craterus, alongside Polyperchon, Antigonus I Monophthalmus, and Antipater's own son, Cassander. Not forgetting Antigonus' son, Demetrius I Poliorcetes, a bit of a character, all commanders of divisions in the Greco-Macedonian army. Following Alexander's death, the Diadochi, after a good deal of squabbling, did initially agree to recognize his son as king, a civilized enough start. Until young Alexander IV came of age, Perdiccas was appointed supreme commander, or strategos, of Asia, whilst Antipater took on the mantle for Europe. Antigonus received Phrygia, Pamphylia, and Lycia. Eumenes was given Paphlagonia and Cappadocia. Ptolemy I Soter landed Egypt. Lysimachus took charge of Thrace and Ionia, and Seleucus I Nicator was handed Babylonia. A rather tidy division of spoils, on paper at least. Early skirmishes and rebellions, however, this newfound peace was rather fleeting. In 322 BC, Athens and sundry other Greek cities, clearly feeling a bit feisty, rebelled against Macedonian rule. Antipater, with his army, found himself rather inconveniently besieged in the fortress of Lamia in Thessaly. Luckily, Craterus came to his aid, and together they delivered a resounding defeat to the Greeks in the Battle of Cranon, whilst the Macedonian fleet, not to be outdone, promptly annihilated the Athenian fleet in the Battle of Amorgos. Athens was then taken by the Macedonian army, and the rebel leader, the rather eloquent philosopher Demosthenes, rather tragically took poison, a grim end to his defiance. However, this rather fleeting little conflict was merely the prelude to a much larger struggle for Alexander's grand inheritance. The shifting sands of power, the machinations continued thick and fast. In 321 BC, Perdiccas rather unceremoniously met his end, assassinated by chaps sent by Ptolemy. Craterus, who had invaded Macedon, perished in 320 BC in battle against Eumenes, a bit of a bad turn for him. Antipater, for his part, was incredibly fortunate for his time, simply dying of natural causes in 319 BC, a rare peaceful departure amidst all the turmoil. In 317 BC, a battle between the forces of Eumenes and Antigonus took place near the city of Paridicene in Iran, which typically didn't really give either side a decisive advantage. The following year, the adversaries met again, but even before the battle properly began, Eumenes was, rather treacherously, killed by his own soldiers, who had been, you've guessed it, bribed by Antigonus. A rather underhanded tactic that. The truce and its collapse then, in 311 BC, a truce was, rather optimistically, concluded between the Diadochi. According to its terms, Cassander was to rule Macedon until Alexander IV came of age. Thrace and the Chersonese remained under the control of Lysimachus. Ptolemy held sway over Egypt, Palestine, and Cyprus. Antigonus governed Asia Minor and Greece, and Seleucus ruled the vast territories east of the Euphrates. But this truce, as these things often do, didn't last terribly long. The very next year, Roxana and her young son Alexander were, rather brutally, killed by order of Cassander, a chilling move. And so in 309 BC, large-scale hostilities resumed, a return to the chaos. In 308 BC, Demetrius gave Menelaus, Ptolemy's brother, a good thrashing in a naval battle off the city of Salamis in Cyprus. Cyprus was left defenseless, and in 306 BC, Antigonus's army promptly captured it. A year prior, Demetrius had captured Athens and most of Greece, and even made a rather bold invasion of Palestine, only to be driven out by Ptolemy. Then came the rather infamous siege of Rhodes. In 305-304 BC, Demetrius' army laid siege to a stubbornly defending garrison of Ptolemy's army on the island. During the assault, every imaginable device was employed: battering rams, ballistae, even liquid fire, apparently oil or some other flammable liquid, rather nasty, as well as undermining the walls. But alas, it was all in vain. The Egyptian fleet, rather cleverly, managed to organize supplies for the besieged, and Demetrius was eventually forced to retreat, a rare failure for him. The Battle of Ipsus and further power shifts in 301 BC near the city of Ipsus in Phrygia, a truly pivotal moment occurred. Seleucus and Lysimachus delivered a crushing defeat to Antigonus and Demetrius. According to the traditional accounts, the decisive factor was the victors' rather impressive use of war elephants and the rather convenient defection of a significant portion of Antigonus's army to their side. Antigonus himself perished in the battle, a dramatic end. Demetrius, ever the elusive one, managed to escape, and he soon established control over the western regions of Asia Minor. Cassander was recognized by Seleucus and Lysimachus as king of Macedon, but, rather fortuitously for others, in 300 BC, he had the good luck to die of natural causes, another peaceful exit amidst the bloodshed. In 294 BC, Demetrius, having rather ruthlessly bumped off Cassander's son, seized the Macedonian throne, a rather opportunistic move. In Greece, after Antigonus's death, the unity of the country, which had been achieved by the sheer force of Macedonian arms, well, it simply fell apart. Here, four distinct political entities now vied with each other: Athens, Sparta, the Aetolian and Achaean leagues, as well as a number of individual polis, or city-states. A right old jumble, that. Demetrius, despite his cunning, managed to hold Macedon for only 8 years. In 286 BC, King Pyrrhus of Epirus, acting in concert with Ptolemy and Lysimachus, rather unceremoniously expelled Demetrius from Macedon. Demetrius retreated to the western regions of Asia Minor, hoping to continue the struggle. However, almost all of Demetrius' army, rather disloyally, defected to the more successful Seleucus, leaving him in a rather dire predicament. Soon, Demetrius had no choice but to surrender to the ruler of the eastern regions of the disintegrated empire. 3 years later, in 283 BC, he died in prison, a rather ignominious end for a once great commander. Ptolemy also died around the same time, a busy period for the Grim Reaper, it seems. The last of the Diadochi and the rise of new kingdoms, but the war, oh yes, it continued. Now it was the turn of the last of the original Diadochi, Seleucus and Lysimachus, who had previously been allies, to clash. With the rather underhand help of Ptolemy Ceraunus, the disinherited son of Ptolemy Soter, Seleucus delivered a decisive defeat to Lysimachus in the Battle of Corupedium in that same eventful year of 283 BC. Lysimachus, alas, died in this battle. Thus Seleucus, rather remarkably, united almost all of Alexander the Great's empire under his sole rule. Only Egypt, where the descendants of Ptolemy I Soter reigned, managed to remain independent, a stubborn pocket of resistance. However, Seleucus's own days were numbered, a cruel twist of fate. In 280 BC, he set off for Macedon to assert his authority there, but was, rather shockingly, assassinated on the way by Ptolemy Ceraunus, the very chap who had helped him defeat Lysimachus. Geronus was then promptly proclaimed king of Macedon. The Macedonian nobility, back in the homeland, were clearly unwilling to accept the status of a peripheral province of Seleucus's predominantly Asian empire, preferring a bit of independence, quite rightly too. However, in 277 BC, Macedon, Greece, and Thrace suffered a terrible disaster. The invasion of Celtic tribes, a formidable foe. Ptolemy Ceraunus himself perished in battle against them. These Celts, rather intrepidly, crossed from the Balkan Peninsula into Asia Minor, but here they were finally defeated by Seleucus's son, Antiochus Soter. And so the wars of the Diadochi finally came to an end. In place of Alexander the Great's ambitious world empire, the so-called Hellenistic states were formed. Macedon, the Ptolemaic kingdom in Egypt and Palestine, and the sprawling Seleucid Empire stretching from the Indus River all the way to Asia Minor. However, the eastern regions, true to form, soon broke away from the empire of Seleucus's descendants, and the powerful Parthian kingdom emerged there, a significant shift. The Seleucids managed to maintain control only over Asia Minor, Syria, and part of Mesopotamia. The world's strongest Greco-Macedonian army, that magnificent fighting force created by Alexander, sadly wasted its strength in decades of internecine strife, and by the 270s BC, no longer presented quite such a formidable opponent. It's no coincidence, you see, that the Celtic invasion brought Macedon itself to the very brink of survival. A century and a half later, these Hellenistic states were, rather easily, conquered by Rome, as they could no longer offer any truly worthy resistance. A rather poignant end to Alexander's grand vision, wouldn't you say?